What if Robin Trower had walked into a record label meeting in 1983 and agreed to everything they asked? The slick production, the shorter songs, the MTV-ready image? We'll never know, because that didn't happen. He walked away instead. Here's his story. Robin Trower was born on March 9th, 1945, in London, and grew up in Southend-on-Sea. It's a seaside town that barely seemed to exist on the map, but turned out to be one of the most fertile breeding grounds for British rock talent of the early 1960s. American soul, electric blues, the first tremors of rock and roll, Southend absorbed all of it. In 1962, Trower co-founded a band called the Paramounts alongside pianist and vocalist Gary Brooker, a high-energy R&B outfit heavily influenced by James Brown and Ray Charles. The Rolling Stones noticed them early and helped them land spots on the package tour circuit. Between 1963 and 1965, the Paramounts cut a series of singles that never quite captured what they delivered life. Technically tidy, but emotionally hollow, compared to what happened on stage. When the band dissolved in 1966, Trower found himself in a kind of musical limbo.
And I'll never question you about where you go and all the things you do.
Then Gary Brooker formed Procol Harum, and A Whiter Shade of Pale became one of the defining songs of 1967. Trower joined shortly after, replacing the original guitarist. It gave him his first real taste of international stages, but it never gave him what he truly needed. Procol Harum was built around Brooker's piano and the Hammond organ of Matthew Fisher. The guitar was important, but it was never the centerpiece. Trower once admitted that, while he was with the band, the only time he saw his guitar was when he walked on stage or into the studio. For a man who heard the world through 6 strings, that was a slow suffocation. He kept writing. He kept pushing. On the 1969 album A Salty Dog, he co-wrote Too Much Between Us, adding an introspective guitar-colored mood to the band's palette. By Broken Barricades, he was contributing heavier, more guitar-driven tracks like Whiskey Train. And then came Song for a Dreamer, a tribute to Jimi Hendrix, who had just died. That song wasn't merely a farewell to a fallen hero. It was a declaration. Trower had found the direction he wanted to go. The only question was whether he was brave enough to walk away from everything he had in order to get there.
A tortured corpse, and no one left alive.
In 1971, he walked. He was 26 years old, an experienced professional in an industry that was already moving fast, and he had exactly 0 guarantees about what came next. It was one of the bolder creative gambles of that era, leaving a successful band with an established audience to chase a sound that existed clearly only in his own head. His first attempt was a short-lived project called Jude, which featured singer Frankie Miller and a Scottish bass player and vocalist named James Dewar. Jude didn't last, but James Dewar did. Dewar had a voice that was genuinely difficult to categorize. It sat somewhere between hard rock and deep soul, warm and gritty at the same time. The kind of voice that made a simple lyric feel like a confession. Trower recognized immediately that Dewar was the missing piece. When Jude fell apart, he didn't go looking for anyone else. He built a trio around the two of them, adding drummer Reg Isidore to complete the lineup. The decision to work as a power trio was deliberate and philosophical. Trower had studied what Jimi Hendrix and Cream had accomplished with minimal personnel and maximum intensity. The trio format forced everything into the open. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to waste space. Every note had to mean something. He named the band after himself, not out of ego, but out of practicality. His name attached to his sound was something that couldn't be taken from him.
She was blessed and a lamb will still be a friend to me. When my time is past, is it too much to ask?
In 1973, the Robin Trower Band released their debut album, Twice Removed, from Yesterday. The record introduced what would become Trower's signature approach: slow burn grooves, soaring guitar lines, and an atmosphere so thick it felt physical. It reached number 106 on the U.S. Billboard charts, which wasn't headline news, but it caught the ears of FM radio programmers who were hunting for exactly this kind of music. Robin Trower had found his audience. Now he needed to give them something they'd never forget. In April 1974, he did exactly that. Bridge of Sighs reached number 7 on the U.S. Billboard charts and stayed on those charts for 31 weeks. It was certified gold, and the title track, like that slow, dense, doom-drenched opening riff rising out of near silence, became one of the most recognizable sounds on American FM radio. The song had a strange origin. Trower had carried the first line of the lyric for years, turning it over in his mind without ever finding the right title to anchor the whole thing. Then one morning, reading the sports pages, he spotted the name of a racehorse, Bridge of Sighs. Something clicked. The title gave the song its identity. Mournful, historical, heavy, with things left unsaid. The recording itself was a technical achievement. Sound engineer Jeff Emmerich, and the man who had helped shape the sonic architecture of the Beatles' greatest albums, brought his meticulous, atmosphere-driven approach to the sessions. He carefully balanced close and ambient microphone placement to capture not just the amp, but the air around it. The result was a guitar tone that felt like it was coming from inside the walls. Enormous, but never harsh. The entire album was recorded in just 16 to 17 days, a reflection of how completely prepared the band was after years of relentless touring. At the center of the sound was Trower's Fender Stratocaster, run through a Shin I-Uni vibe, a phase-shifting pedal that produced what fans and critics described as a thick, chewy, psychedelic tone. He used the middle pickup, cranked the mid-range, and cut both treble and bass. The result was something genuinely new, a tone that felt alive, that breathed, that seemed to move around the room when you heard it through a good pair of speakers late at night. Later in 1974, Trower replaced drummer Reg Isidore with Bill Lorden, formerly of Sly and the Family Stone. Lorden brought a funk sophistication that deepened the sound further, the ability to lock into a groove that was simultaneously heavy and fluid. The Dewar-Lorden lineup became what many fans and historians consider the definitive version of the Robin Trower Band. The momentum continued into 1975 with For Earth Below, which climbed even higher, reaching number 5 on the US charts and earning another gold certification. Trower was now headlining arenas across America, the crowd drawn in and held there, song after song, in a kind of collective trance. At a 1975 show in Houston, the audience witnessed a performance so commanding that Humble Pie, the headliners, found themselves in an impossible position. Robin Trower was, without question, one of the biggest guitar heroes on the planet. Then, the world changed. By the late 1970s, punk had arrived in Britain with an aggressive contempt for everything the classic rock era had built. Disco was pulling millions of listeners in a completely different direction, and somewhere beneath both of those movements, the long-form atmospheric blues rock that had made Trower an arena headliner was beginning to feel, to radio programmers at least, like a relic of the recent past. Trower never changed his approach to accommodate the shifting tastes. He remained committed to what he called emotional power, the belief that a guitar note sustained at the right moment with the right tone could communicate something that no amount of technical speed or radio-friendly arrangement could match. That commitment was admirable. It was also, in commercial terms, increasingly costly. MTV launched in August 1981 and almost overnight rewrote the rules for what it meant to be a rock musician. Image mattered as much as sound. Short, visually compelling videos were the new currency. The slow, atmospheric blues rock that Trower had built his career on didn't fit the format. There was no obvious way to translate that sound into a 3-minute video that could compete with what the new wave acts were delivering to the screen. He attempted to adapt. He collaborated with former Cream bass player Jack Bruce, producing BLT in 1981 and Truce in 1982. But the pairing of two genuine guitar-era legends failed to produce the commercial spark that either of them needed. In 1984, Trower split from his record label, the same label that had been his home for the entirety of his major commercial run. He was no longer a priority. The man whose name had sold out arenas across America just 8 years earlier was now without a major label deal. He took stock, he reassessed, and somewhere in that reflection, he reached a conclusion that said more about his character than any chart position ever had. He was no longer interested in shifting units or shaping his music around the expectations of record executives. He had found his emotional truth on Bridge of Sighs. He intended to keep pursuing it, and whether or not the industry was listening. So he kept going. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, he took full control of his output, recording independently with no label interference, no commercial pressure. Albums like 20th Century Blues. In 1994 and Someday Blues in 1997 reflected a musician making music purely on his own terms. The venues were smaller, the crowds more intimate, and Trower admitted to enjoying the stage more in those years than he had during the arena period. But the era was also marked by deep personal sorrow. James Dewar, the voice that had been inseparable from the sound of Robin Trower at his peak, had suffered a series of strokes caused by a rare medical condition. He spent his final years in a hospital in Scotland, far from the stages where his voice had once moved thousands of people to silence. In May 2002, James Dewar passed away at the age of 59. His was one of the most underrated voices of his generation, a singer whose voice carried the full weight of every song he sang. The loss was irreplaceable, and Trower knew it. Decades have a way of revealing what was real and what was simply fashionable. 50th anniversary of Bridge of Sighs arrived in 2024, and with it came deluxe reissues, renewed critical attention, and a new generation of listeners discovering the album through streaming platforms and classic rock playlists. What they found was something that hadn't aged. The opening notes of the title track still carried the same weight, the same sense of impending darkness and emotional depth they had carried in 1974. Among guitarists specifically, Trower's influence had never fully receded. Joe Bonamassa spoke openly about studying Trower's tone and technique in exhaustive detail. The slow burn philosophy, the idea that tempo is irrelevant as long as emotional power is present, had become a foundational principle for an entire lineage of blues rock players. Even in his late 70s, Trower kept releasing new music, including his 2023 studio album Joyful Sky. Robin Trower never ruled the charts the way some of his contemporaries did. He ruled something harder to measure. The late night FM moment, when the right song found you at exactly the right time. The radio eventually moved on. The arenas went dark, but that sound never really left. It just waited. And it's still waiting in every note of Bridge of Sighs for the next listener willing to slow down and listen. What's your memory of Robin Trower? Drop it in the comments. And subscribe for more deep dives into rock's most uncompromising artists.
And I'll never question you about where you go and all the things you do. A tortured corpse, and no one left alive.
She was blessed and the land gone. Will still be a friend to me. But my time is